Opportunity you are affording me to engage with you. I've come down here to, let me just get this off here. I've come down today as the start of a process of getting a better understanding of the Vaal regional sewer system, and also on the intervention, the emergency intervention. As I'm sure you might be aware, there are two parallel interventions running at the moment, where the SRSS, as we know it, is being implemented by Rand Water on behalf of the department. And in fact, Module 6 on the SRSS has just been completed and is going through the defects liability period. So they're doing the testing of the plant at the moment, which started today. So there's progress on that, and that's Module 6 at Sebokeng. But the SRSS, and we can talk about it on another occasion, is a much bigger scheme which relates to the upgrading of 3 other wastewater treatment works to increase the capacity to about 320 million cubic meters eventually. That's million cubic meters per day. So it's quite large extensions, and it's extensions which have been on the cards for quite a long period of time, and the department has been using Rand Water as our implementing agent to implement that side of the project. It's a project that currently is not fully funded, so we do have funding constraints, and we're hoping that very soon we'll be able to start with Module 7 on the Sebokeng works to get that up and running as well. But we are currently engaged with Rand Water around how we do the Module 7 implementation. And then on the other end, we've got the we call the intervention project, which is dealing with the sewer blockages in terms of the 44 pump stations that we have in the area, and many of those pump stations were dysfunctional, and the rising mains were blocked and have had to be unblocked. And that's a project where we initially had the Defence Force who came in and did some very much emergency stopgap interventions to do some clearing of settling tanks at the wastewater treatment works, and some clearing around the pump stations. And then we had a short-term contract with Airwatt, who then continued with the work on the that was being done by the Defence Force. The Airwatt contract came to an end at the end of June, and the department has taken on responsibility for continuing with that intervention project, and we're currently just engaging with Airwatt in terms of the closeout of the Airwatt contract and the cession of contracts. As you can no doubt understand, that a contract like that, when it comes to an end, one has to deal with all of the contractual arrangements, and if there is an advantage in carrying on with some of the contracts which Airwatt had in place, we have those contracts ceded to the department. And that's the work that is underway currently. This morning I was intending to have a meeting with the accounting officers of the municipalities in the area, Sedibeng District Municipality, Mid-Vaal, Lesedi and Emfuleni, to see how, as accounting officers, we take the long-term project forward and how we deal with the funding. And one of the presentations we were due to listen to this morning was a presentation by the DBSA, who are looking to put on the table a long-term funding plan for the project. Because in the long term, I think we need around about 7 billion to bring the project to conclusion, and that includes a central collector wastewater treatment works, which would eventually take the wastewater to a point that it is beneficiated for a second use, which could either be fit for purpose
your encouragement, and then we can be able to go. Yes, so you'll identify yourself.
Thank you. Sabuma Aki from ESCA. Thanks for that activity. I've got a few questions here. I was here last year. There's quite an extensive story about the issue of the Vaal River and what's been happening there. So I just want to know a few things. What is the department going to do about the toxic sludge that is in the Reef Strait? That is, of course, caused by the excessive amount of raw sewage that's flowing into the river. And then there's been no improvement. Apparently, I've spoken to some of the residents who actually who are affected by the sewage that's in the Vaal River. They said that there's been no improvement in the water quality over the past year. So why is that? Why does the department not ensure that everyone fix the treatment plants instead of just spending a year unblocking the pipes? Or do they actually do more than just unblock the pipes? Why does the department allow sewage pollution of the river to go on for so many years without taking action to enforce this, to actually take some kind of action before it had to get so bad? And when will the new plant at Sebokeng be in operation? And then the issue of the Eskom power outages also adds to pollution problems due to treatment plants and pump stations having no backup power. How is the department planning to deal with this? That's it from me.
That's a whole thesis on its own.
Hallelujah.
Yes.
This Eskom network is one of here. Just got another question if you like.
You're from Belvoir?
Network 17.
I've just got another question with regards to Rand Water. Over the weekend we came to find that 3 billion rand upgrade is due for Rand Water. I would just like to know what needs upgrading and why does it need upgrading?
Shall we take those?
Let's just take one more.
We've almost closed it out.
Right. Now, the planning of doing all the upgrades, will this be done departmentally, or will private sector engineering companies, construction companies be involved? And to what extent is there certainty about securing the funding that you need to do a proper upgrade, which is probably upwards of 7 billion rand just in the Sedibeng region?
Okay, let me try and deal with them as they've come. Cleanup doesn't happen overnight. Okay, it does take a while, and the cleanup has to start in terms of making sure that the effluent gets into the wastewater treatment works, and that's what ARWAT and Defence Force were doing before us. So, is to unblock the wastewater treatment works and get them to operate in a manner of speaking. And why do I say in a manner of speaking? Is because those wastewater treatment works are way over capacity. In other words, there's much more effluent going into those wastewater treatment works than what they were designed for. So in their current form, we're never going to get effluent to meet the current standards without doing upgrades. And that comes to the last question that was raised, is why do we have to do the upgrades? And it's really to be able to increase the capacity to take on the increased flows which have developed over a number of years. So as part of the cleanup, that toxic sludge, yes, will be cleaned up as well. I would hope that by next week I'd be able to give you a better indication of a time frame for that. But let me say that water quality wise, when you're talking water quality, that'll be water quality in the river. But there's no impact on our water quality for drinking water. Okay, I must emphasize that drinking water quality is not impacted by the current pollution that's taking place. The drinking water that all of the municipal areas, the metros within the Rand Water supply area, is taken directly from the Rand, from Vaal Dam into the Suikerbos water treatment works and distributed from there. And even if they do pick up water that might have pollutants in it, they've got very sophisticated purification processes that will make sure that that water meets the drinking water standards. So that is one message I would like the public to understand, is while the river might be polluted, there is no danger to the drinking water that is being provided to communities in the greater Gauteng urban community. Rand Water is an organization which is over 100 years old, and they've got top-class, world-class equipment that they run, and they've got very competent staff who are running those facilities to make sure that there's no fallback in terms of water quality. So while we must be concerned about the river water quality as well, because as the sewers flow into the Vaal, below the Vaal Dam, across the barrage and lower down, it affects other users downstream who have to then pick that water up, purify it, and then the cost of purifying that water becomes even greater. But we don't have any reports at this point in time where any of those municipalities who pick up water lower down on the Vaal River are having any problems with bringing that water up to the proper drinking water to meet the SANS, is a SANS 241 drinking water standards. That's the South African Bureau Standards, Standard 241, which is the standard for drinking water quality. So I'd like to assure the public of that. Look, we haven't invested, in terms of why has it been going on for so long, we haven't adequately invested in some of the bulk infrastructure which is required to meet with the urban development that's taking place within the Sedibeng district municipal area in particular. And so we've got to speed up that process. And the question that was asked by Johan Tempelhoff in terms of the funding, that's what will be engaging with going forward with the DBSA, is to find a mechanism to secure that funding. Given the nature of the project, it'll in all probability have to be funding off budget, which we would fund through commercial loans and through DFIs, the development funding institutions, such as the DBSA, the New Development Bank, and others, to put funding in place to be able to do the much bigger scheme, which will still take 3 to 4 years to complete. But we've got to put that in place, and we've got to do that. That's part of the long-term scheme. Eskom power outages, yes, they do impact on us. So while we might clear up and work on the 44 pump stations, when we have a power outage, those pump stations shut down, the sumps get full, and then you have difficulty in moving that effluent out there. So part of the emergency intervention will also be the purchase of generators, which we will be installing generators at those pump stations to make sure that we are less affected by the Eskom power outages, whether those are planned or unplanned power outages. So I hope I've covered in general terms the questions. In terms of Netwerk 24's or 24's question around the Rand Water and the 3 billion Rand required, that's part of the bigger 7 billion that I'm talking about. Now, Rand Water had originally been contracted as an IA for the department around specific upgrades, which at this stage didn't include the regional wastewater treatment works, which will be built at Ritvlei. I hope I've got the place right. Is Ritvlei? Yes. That's where the reclamation works will eventually be built. So we'll have some deep outfall sewer, which will take the much of the pre-treated effluent from the other treatment works, take it through to Ritvlei, where it would then be treated for fit for purpose use.
Thank you so much. Follow up. So
out if you know about any families who've been affected by the sewage? I mean, it's the Vaal River in itself, but there's also a huge issue that some of it actually goes into people's homes, where people have gotten sick in this particular area. That's the one thing. And have you guys been taken to court? Have been any court papers that have been handed to the department because of this situation?
In responding to you that, let me just first say that I personally am not aware, but I have seen reports of folk who have, who it's reported have become ill because of being exposed to raw sewage. In terms of the legal process is not against the department. Bearing in mind the department is currently operating in a municipal space. If you look at the Constitution and Schedule 4B of the Constitution, the functions that we are performing and assisting with are within the purview and the mandate of local government. So Save the Vaal, I think they call themselves, have got court applications out there to against the municipalities, and we certainly, I'm going to be engaging with Save as one of the stakeholders in the resolution to the problems as well, and we would hope to talk to them around their court actions, which I understand, they have had in place, and following meetings with Minister Sisulu early on in the year, they had agreed to pen that court action while we tried to get our program in place. So I would hope to be able to convince them that we're still on track to make sure that we execute those commitments which Minister Sisulu made at the time. So as Minister Sisulu's accounting officer, I'm doing a situation assessment and to be able to report back to her before she would come out here again to see what progress we've made. So it's part of the process I'm involved in.
Yes, just another question. I'll come to you.
How long will it take for the Vaal River to be cleaned up? For the whole process to be completed and everything is back to normal?
You know, I've given you a broad time frame for the upgrades of the existing wastewater treatment works and eventually the centralized wastewater treatment works as 3 to 4 years. I think that's a reasonable time frame, but depending on how successful we are with raising the funding, that'll determine whether that date gets pushed out or not. But there is, government does see that there's an urgency in terms of doing it, and if you follow, which I'm sure you do, the recovery program, post-COVID recovery, economic recovery program, infrastructure is one of the legs of that recovery program, and the Sedibeng project is one of the infrastructure projects which is included in that program. So we've got to go out there and make sure that we secure the funding and see whether we can do it in a short space of time. But I've given you that very broad time frame.
So about 3 to 4 years.
3 to 4 years. Leonardo, I'm correct in that. Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up?
The question about the private sector becoming involved in the Sebokeng wastewater treatment works, is that still on the table, or will the department be doing that?
Look, I mean, Rand Water and the department, if the department takes full responsibility for it, department would also bring in contractors to do the work, which is a private sector involvement. But what we've got to do in bringing private contractors in, as Rand Water would do in any event, is that we also have a look at dealing with the set-asides that are expected in terms of the way we implement projects. And you've heard the President indicating that he would like to see a 40% set-aside for women enterprises. So we've got to have a look, see how we do those set-asides. Currently, we've been working on a 30% set aside, and I've got to do some monitoring and evaluate what's been done to see how close we've got to those set asides, and if we haven't, we've got to take corrective measures to do that.
Yes.
Does that help?
Yes, colleagues.
Can I just have one more question? At present, about 56% of our wastewater treatment works in South Africa are functional. Is Emfuleni a benchmark for what we can expect in the next 7 to 10 years? Or is it a one-timer, or will there be a greater consistency, especially at the local government level, to try and get these systems working properly in the interest of all South Africans, because it's an issue of environmental health that we are talking about, and it also includes water security.
Emfuleni isn't a once-off. I think you are pretty familiar with the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan, and in that National Sanitation and Water Master Plan, we've included the issue of the dysfunctional wastewater and water treatment works, for that matter. And those are identified as a high priority in terms of bringing them back into operation. And they certainly have been included in the when we did the budget assessment to try and get a sense of what was required over the next 10 years to fund the National Water and Sanitation Plan in terms of water security. We took into account the not only the O&M on that infrastructure, but where we needed to deal with refurbishment. So all of those municipalities, if we and part of the process is also resuscitating the green and the blue drop regulatory framework. And as you're aware, if you follow the green and blue drop, particularly with the green drop, all of those municipalities who have dysfunctional wastewater treatment works should be preparing risk abatement plans, and those risk abatement plans would include issues of operation and maintenance, the skills that are required to operate the infrastructure, and the upgrading or augmentation that would be required to be able to treat the wastewater streams that come into those wastewater treatment works. So it's a cocktail of activities that has to take place through the economic recovery plan. There are a number of wastewater treatment works, including the Rooiwaal in Tshwane, which have been identified for possible recycling as well. So that's not just bringing those wastewater treatment works up to a standard to treat wastewater and discharge it back into the rivers, but to bring that wastewater up to a standard where it's fit for purpose, another purpose, which could be right up to drinking water purpose or for industrial use. So that's part of the recovery plan as well.
Okay, one more question, please.
Sputnik Sands.
It's going to be the last question.
The last question. In terms of the long-term planning, if we look at the National Development Plan, according to estimates, we need something like 33 billion rand per year if we want to have safe water by 2030. Will that be possible?
I'm the eternal optimist, and those numbers are on the table. But if you were at Minister's project launch on the master plan in November last year, you will have been there when she identified some of the priority actions during the current administration. So the 33 billion that's required annually for the next 10 years is certainly a projection. I can't guarantee that we will get all of that funding, but certainly in terms of implementing the priority interventions as announced by Minister last year, we will certainly work towards getting the funding for those. And later on in November, there will be a further engagement in terms of the sector around the plans going forward, following that announcement which the Minister made last year. On the anniversary of that announcement, I'm sure we will have some indication of where we are, just as a dipstick of what we've achieved, and identify where we might have slacked off and how we need to maybe change course. But we certainly are working towards the implementation of the priority actions around the master plan that were announced last year. I think it was on the 28th of November or thereabouts, by Minister Sisulu in an engagement that she had at the CSIR.
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much for the time. Thank you very much, Acting DG. Yes, it was a hard
Is that off? I don't want to see you to see me breathing a sigh of relief when it goes off, but I am.
Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of the briefing. Thank you.
Thanks, colleagues. Thanks for that. And Sputnik will keep in touch with you in terms of what